us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. The March 14 delegation highlights coexistence and civil peace during talks with Tripoli's Mufti Sheikh Malik al-Shahar. At least 41 fighters are killed in violent clashes pitting Kurds against jihadists and Islamist rebels in Syria. And Iran and Britain agree to name a charge d'affaires to each other's country within 2 weeks, following a break in diplomatic ties since 2011. A delegation from the March 14 General Secretariat has visited the northern city of Tripoli in a show of support and has held talks with Mufti Sheikh Malik al-Shahar to stress coexistence. March 14 General Secretariat Coordinator Faris Said says whatever harms Tripoli affects the country as a whole. Phalange MP Samer Saadi, who was part of the delegation, says he hopes the March 14's initiative will be a new start for Tripoli. The Mufti also hopes that the city will be the cornerstone for civil peace in Lebanon. He condemns the use of arms owned by his rivals, saying they seek to cause provocation. Future Movement official Mustafa Alouche says a decision was taken to stage a national closed-door meeting in Tripoli. The city, which has witnessed sectarian clashes over the past months, was targeted by twin car bomb explosions near 2 mosques, killing 51 people in August. The deputy head of the Higher Shiites Islamic Council, Sheikh Abdul Amir Kabalan, has called on authorities to disarm all factions. In a Zayd al-Adha sermon, Kabalan urged the state to stop issuing licenses to gunmen and says authorities should take strong measures against them. Kabalan is calling on people to perform good deeds, be religious and become honest. He says people should recognize the rights of others and be responsible. Addressing the warring parties in neighboring Syria, Kabalan says they should stop committing acts of terrorism. He called further for an end to the fighting in the country. The Lebanese army says it has arrested a number of suspects after an overnight family dispute in the Bekaa Valley developed into a shootout, which left several people wounded. The military says both sides used light weapons and shotguns before the army intervened and restored calm in the area. Several men suspected of firing the shots were later arrested, and a quantity of weapons and ammunition was also confiscated during the raids. The wounded men were taken to local hospitals and kept under military guard. The military is still in pursuit of other suspects involved in the shootout. At least 41 fighters have been killed in violent clashes pitting Kurds against jihadists and Islamist rebels in northeastern Syria. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says Kurdish fighters from several villages in oil-rich Hasakeh province are engaged in combat against al-Qaeda-affiliated groups. The source says 12 fighters from the Committees for the Protection of the Kurdish People have also been killed. Clashes have raged in majority Kurdish areas for months now, as the jihadist ISIL has sought to expel the YPG from areas under its control. Elsewhere in the country, a powerful blast ripped through a pickup truck in the southern province of Darha, killing 21 people, including 4 children. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says activists are blaming regime troops for planting the explosives. Rebels fighting President Bashar al-Assad's regime in southern Syria say the main opposition national coalition has failed and have announced they no longer recognize the Western-backed group. The video statement signed by nearly 70 groups comes after a group of key rebel groups in the north of the country announced their rejection of the national coalition in late September. Filmed in an unarmed desert area, the video statement shows rebels dressed in army fatigues and holding up their weapons. The fractured coalition, representing the opposition abroad on the political front with Western backing, has gone through several crises during the course of Syria's 31-month-old civil war. And coming up next, an alleged senior al-Qaeda figure captured in Libya pleads not guilty in a U.S. federal court. More on this after the break. Welcome back. Thousands of Muslims on Hajj in Mecca have taken part in the symbolic stoning of the devil ritual. The Rami al-Jamarat ritual is part of Eid al-Adha, or Feast of the Sacrifice, when Muslims slaughter lambs to feed the hungry. It is also a part of the annual 4-day Hajj pilgrimage, a central pillar for the Muslim faith. The Hajj brings together millions of Muslims from all over the world in prayer and supplication. Muslims believe the Hajj traces the paths of the prophets Abraham, Ishmael, and Muhammad. Europe's Foreign Affairs Chief Catherine Ashton and Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi are carrying out a second day of meetings at the UN headquarters in Geneva. to ease fears regarding Iran's nuclear program. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and his team presented what they say is a potential breakthrough plan for a decade-old standoff over their country's contested nuclear program. Neither Iran nor the 6 nations negotiating with it revealed details of the proposal, but EU sources say the Iranian presentation had been very useful. On the other hand, Gharakshi, a senior Iranian negotiator, praised the very positive environment and says the reaction was good across the table. Iran and Britain have further agreed to name a chargé d'affaires to each other's country within 2 weeks, following a break in diplomatic ties since 2011. An alleged Syrian al-Qaeda figure captured in Libya has pleaded not guilty in a U.S. federal court to allegations he was involved in the 1998 bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Kenya. The appearance of Abdul Hamid al-Ruqai, better known as Abu Anas al-Libi, comes 10 days after a U.S. Army squad captured him in the Libyan capital of Tripoli and sent him to a U.S. Navy ship in the Mediterranean Sea for interrogation. Judge Louis Kaplan read out the list of conspiracy charges against him before adjourning the next hearing until October the 22nd. The 49-year-old appeared in the federal court in New York, the city where he was indicted by a grand jury in 2000. Al-Libi is accused of conspiracy to murder, kidnap, and maim Americans and of plotting to maliciously damage and destroy U.S. property. A Russian court has upheld the theft conviction against opposition leader Alexei Navalny, but suspended his 5-year prison sentence. This implies the prominent critic of President Vladimir Putin will not be jailed. Navalny was convicted in July of organizing the theft of nearly $500,000 from a timber firm in 2009. He had appealed the verdict and sentence, contending the case against him was bogus and politically motivated. He accused the trial judge of rubber-stamping a fabricated indictment. A blogger against corruption among Russia's elite, Navalny helped lead the biggest protest of Putin's rule, which were stroked by allegations of fraud in favor of the ruling United Russia party in the December 2011 parliamentary election. Jailing Navalny may have revived street protests by Putin's opponents and human rights activists over what they see as a clampdown on dissent since Putin started his 6-year third term in 2012. The United States government's shutdown is impacting millions of people across the country, and some businesses are struggling to survive. While politicians continue to argue both behind closed doors and in public, ordinary people are being left stuck in the middle. House Republican efforts to pass legislation averting a U.S. debt default and ending a partial government shutdown have collapsed, and a top ratings firm warned of a possible downgrade in the country's credit worthiness. Just hours after unveiling it, Republican leaders pulled legislation to reopen the government and raise the amount of money the Treasury can borrow to pay the nation's bills. And now for news around the world. In brief, police and groups of protesters have clashed in the Brazilian cities of Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo at the end of peaceful demonstrations. In Rio, about 4,000 demonstrators gathered in the city center to mark National Teachers' Day and show their support for public school teachers who've been demanding better pay and affordable housing. At least 144 people are killed after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck the central Philippine islands of Bohol, Cebu, and Siquijor. A state of emergency is declared as rescue workers are searching for survivors. Many roads and bridges are damaged, making rescue operations difficult. The historic churches dating from the Spanish colonial period suffered the most. 14 people have been killed on an island off the east coast of Japan as typhoon swept through the country, triggering landslides. Police and town officials say most of the casualties had been buried by mudslides. Dozens of homes were destroyed and more than 50 people are still missing. The storm forces the closure of dozens of schools in the Tokyo area. Trains and flights were also cancelled, leaving passengers stranded at stations and airport. A new exhibition at Paris's Immigration History Museum takes an intriguing look at how comic books over the world are shaped by the immigrant story, from French Asterix's Polish and Italian authors to American Superman's Eastern European co-creators. The exhibition on comics and immigration brings together comic sketches and magazines from 1913 to the present to show how immigrants on the fringes of society were attracted to the subculture of comic books. Organizers claim the comic characters themselves are often masked allegories for being foreign, from Asterix, the yellow-haired Gaul who fights Romans and travels around the world, to the alien Kal-El, who tries to live on Earth among humans despite his superpowers. The exhibition opens today and includes 500 sketches and documents from some 117 artists.
We show how the history of the scenarists or the drawers of the comics are they are immigrants. Their own history is a story of immigrants, and how they put it in their own works of art. Every comic about immigration is a story about an individual, and every comic about this theme wants to show by the individuals or by the way of individual stories a story about humanity, so a universal story. I think the second degree is very important in comics about immigration, because you have to laugh to accept the ordeals you go through when you are an immigrant, and you have to make people laugh to accept that there are stories very tough and very difficult.
And in the United States, it was a star-studded affair in New York last night with Billy Joel, Alec Baldwin, and many other celebrities walking the red carpet for the Elton John AIDS Foundation's annual Enduring Vision benefit. John continues his global humanitarian efforts to help raise money for innovative HIV/AIDS prevention programs, campaigns to end stigma and provide treatment, care and support services for people living with the disease. Sir Elton and partner David Furnish spoke about the Foundation's ongoing mission on the Arrivals line.
Every year people still come and they still donate, and I think they do that because we're a very tight ship. We run a very good, good organisation. We don't waste their money. They know that, so they come back every year and they give us more of their money. So that makes us feel proud, and we're very grateful to the people that come here and do that. But I think it's because of the reputation that the AIDS Foundation has gotten over the 20 years that we've been existent, you know.
And the successes and the gains that we're seeing made in the fight against AIDS. 12 years ago when we started, we didn't think we'd see an end to this disease. But now with the advances in medical treatment, we actually can see that on the horizon, and it's a very exciting thing, and we can see the momentum building. So we can't stop the fight, we have to keep going.
Well, they've raised over $300 million, number one, so that's a biggie. He's kind of tireless in his efforts here, and he puts together a group of great people, so good for him.
How much Elton is stuck with this charity? I mean, he really, a lot of celebrities, they launch this thing, they put their name behind it, they get it going, they get that ball teed up, and they kind of pass it on to other people. But he's here every year. I mean, he's still doing this and still putting his shoulder into this. And
this marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. The March 14 delegation highlights coexistence and civil peace during talks with Tripoli's Mufti Sheikh Malik al-Sha'ad. At least 41 fighters are killed in violent clashes pitting Kurds against jihadists and Islamist rebels in Syria. Finally, Iran and Britain agreed to name a chargé d'affaires to each other's country within 2 weeks following a break in diplomatic ties since 2011. Those are your Wednesday headlines from the news team here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very happy Eid.